Welcome to Teaching in Color, the podcast where we empower teachers, redefine education, and amplify voices. Here, we dive into real stories, bold conversations, and the challenges and triumphs of educators making a difference. Whether you're in the classroom, the community, or just here for inspiration, this is your space. Let's talk, let's grow, and let's make change together. This is Teaching in Color. Welcome back to Teaching in Color, the podcast where we dive into the unique experiences of educators who bring creativity, identity, and passion into their classroom. Today, we have an incredible guest, Stephanie Wan, a first-year public school art teacher in New York City, a published children's book author and illustrator, and an artist who uses her work to reflect on identity and culture. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here, Brandon.
Of course, of course. Thank you so much for being here. I think today's conversation will be definitely something that I have never encountered. So I'm really interested in hearing your story and your creativity. Like, I love creators, and I know that you are so passionate about your art and your work. So I'm
hmm
super excited about that today.
hmm
So we're going to transition into segment one, and that is all about journey into art and education. We start this podcast with a kind of introduction into how you transitioned into education, like how that journey was for you. So, what inspired you to pursue a career in both art and teaching?
So, when I was younger, I was actually selectively mute,
Mhm.
and art kind of became my vehicle for communicating with others.
Yeah.
Like when I was sad, when I was happy, when I wanted something, that was like the way that I would communicate.
Hmm.
And, I think my passion for art just kind of grew from there. As for the teaching side of things, I had this teacher in first grade. I'll never forget her. She was the first adult in my life outside of home who made me feel accepted and understood for who I was. She never made me feel judged. And
Hmm.
she also, like, always encouraged me to continue drawing and continue with my artwork. So, with that, like, I kind of felt a deep affinity for both art and school in a way. So I was one of
Yeah.
those kids who actually liked being in the classroom and liked being in school because it made me feel safe. And so, like as a kid, I've always kind of knew or felt that I wanted to teach mainly because of her.
Hmm.
But I also wanted to be an artist too. And then, later on, I realized that especially like as we get into the older grades, you could specialize in teaching a specific subject. And, that's how I knew, hey, I wanted to be an art teacher.
Wow, I love that. I love that story because for a lot of students, just, hearing your story, there are a lot of students who go through their academic journey in school and
Mhm,
they have like that one influential teacher who really paved the way for them to, not just go into teaching, but believe in themselves and really
mhm.
take their art and their creativity to the next level. And I love that I hear that in your story,
Yeah.
because in reality, that's not always the case for every student, right? We have students who leave the education system and still, maybe haven't had that experience. So I love how you have that and you're highlighting it.
Yeah.
So, you talk about your growing up and your upbringing and that kind of transitioning into where you are now. This is your
Mhm.
first year as a public school art teacher in New York City. How
Yes.
has it been so far?
Um, I'm learning the ropes, like I'm still adjusting to a lot of things,
Yeah.
but it's actually not been too bad so far. And, I would say like it's very rewarding
Yeah.
overall. I'd say like the one hiccup is that, like I said, I'm still kind of getting used to adjusting to different things, like,
Hmm.
having many responsibilities outside of classroom time and
Yeah.
stuff like that. I spent a lot of my lunch breaks trying to prep,
Hmm.
going to PD meetings and stuff like that. I also run the art club after school on Thursday, so that's another responsibility on my
Yeah.
plate. But, overall, I think it's going very well, and I'm really happy where I am and where things are going.
I love that. So have you lived in New York City for a while?
Yeah, I was born and raised here actually.
Okay, okay. So yeah, I mean, we had a guest
Yeah.
on the podcast not too long ago, and they're from Brooklyn. So I was telling them that I went to New York like one time. I visited during the summer on vacation, and I was like just so interested in like the busy, like fast pace of it all. Like I'm in Houston, and Houston is like fast paced, like city lifestyle, but it's also like very slow at the same time. But New York was
Yeah.
so fast paced. So I can just imagine being a teacher there.
Right.
So, you talk about how your first year is going, and I love that, you're starting that cycle of, you're noticing very early on, like, yes, there is so much that we have to do outside of the classroom. What have been some of your biggest learning moments as a teacher right now?
I think just accepting the fact that sometimes a lesson plan will not always go as I envisioned it in my
Yeah.
head because, like you never know, something might happen along the way,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe you're working with a group where maybe this specific strategy works for them, but
Yeah.
then with another group, the same exact lesson, that strategy or that whole lesson might not work as well for them. So, for me right now, like it's all about kind of adapting to the different needs and reading the room.
Yeah. It's so funny that you bring that up is like teachers are so good at adapting to
Hmm.
things. Like honestly, teachers can do anything. Honestly, anything because we're so good
Yeah.
at like adapting to like because when we go into the classroom, it's not always set in stone. And I love how you bring that
Right.
up. Is like we can, draft out these lesson plans and put everything we want into them and envision this perfect scenario, but it's
Hmm.
always something different happening each day.
Yeah, and like with that, I find, oh, like, hey, something else that I didn't think of that
Yeah.
came out of this today actually
Yeah.
worked. And then, if I ever want to recycle the same kind of plan or whatever
Hmm.
next time, I have a better idea of what I'm looking for. Like, at the end of the day, I realized that a plan is there to kind of be like your blueprint or guide map, but
Hmm.
also, to keep in mind that it's important not to be mentally married to it because you never know.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you. That was perfectly said. You earned your bachelor's in illustration from FIT and your
Hmm.
master's in art education from NYU. How did
Yes.
your education influence the way you teach and create art?
I mean, I think just the idea of seeing how my professors interacted with us
Hmm.
and with my cohort, like, what to look for. So a
Yeah.
lot of it is about building relationships. And,
Hmm.
we build relationships everywhere we go in life, no matter what we work with or where we teach in. But, especially in a school setting, it's more crucial than ever. So, being around these people, being around these professionals, like
Hmm.
whether in the industry or in the education sector, really kind of honed in on how I would want to approach relationships.
Yeah.
And also just, having these people as kind of my mentors to guide me along the way. Like it helped me look for, okay, what kinds of things can I bring into the classroom for our
Yes.
projects, like kind of piggybacking off the ideas that they've set for us and trying to incorporate that into my curriculum, but also make it my own.
Yeah, I love that integration of like you and also like the curriculum as well because I think it's so important to have creative freedom in what you
Hmm.
present
Right.
as a teacher. So I love how you marry those two.
Yeah.
Um, we're gonna transition into segment two, which is art as a reflection of identity. Your cultural background plays a big role in your artistic approach. Can you share how your experiences as an Asian American woman influence your work?
So, growing up, like, I always known that in some ways it'd be different from my peers, right?
Hmm.
Culturally. And also, I have to kind of think about things that maybe like my more privileged peers or other people might not have
Yeah.
to really think about in their day to day life. And, for that, I feel lucky that I'm in New York City where there's a
Hmm.
lot more diversity. But, I know that in other places, like I've talked to people from all over who said that they weren't so lucky to have
Hmm.
the kinds of experiences that I had in terms of race and identity.
Yeah.
I'd say especially since the 2020 pandemic and the
Hmm.
lockdown and everything, I became like more hyper aware and vigilant about my identity in
Yes.
society because, of all the like anti-Asian hate crimes
Hmm.
and like all the scapegoating against my community because of the
Yes.
virus. And that just kind of brought to light about how like, oh, crap, like, the Asian American experience, like our history
Hmm.
gets swept under the rug a lot. It's not talked about as much in media. And then, like in 2021, when the Atlanta spa shootings happened,
Yes.
I'm sure most of you guys remember,
Hmm.
like that really triggered a chord in me more than 2020 even had because not only was my identity in question
Yeah.
but also like how I view myself and how like I view gender is being called
Yes.
into question too. Like I feel like a lot of these things intersect: gender, race, orientation, whatever. And then so after I graduated in 2021 from FIT, our school, or my program specifically, they called some alumni back
Hmm.
to do a mural. So like it's kind of an annual tradition where
Yeah.
every year the illustration program at FIT does a mural program called Chalk FIT, where we draw or paint with chalk on campus walls, literally, for the public to see.
Hmm.
And our theme that year was social change.
Mm.
So it made me think about everything that my community had to experience throughout
Yeah.
those 2 years. And then it compelled me to like make this mural of a Asian looking woman, like
Hmm.
in the pose of Rosie the Riveter. The
Hmm.
World War I or II
Yes.
propaganda poster, that one. But like, instead I replaced it with an Asian woman instead.
Hmm.
And then for my slogan, I wrote not a virus.
Hmm.
But then I felt like I could do more with it. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, saying that resonates with the Asian community in general already.
Hmm.
But how could I also center this approach around what Asian women and women of color in general have to
Yeah.
go through? And so I wanted to like point attention to like the history of fetishization other people have towards women of color and
Yeah.
Asian women, especially in the dating scene, and
Hmm.
how that contributes to sexual violence and all
Yes.
these other things. And so I was inspired to make that piece because I wanted to educate the public about these issues that get
Hmm.
swept under the rug.
Wow. I mean, I just want to say, didn't stop and just say thank you for like that creativity and that art and there's it's hard sometimes to have be a creative and have
Mm-hmm.
your art and have it be impactful, and especially on a stage or a mural where thousands of people will view this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard, especially in these times, to use your voice for things like that,
Right.
where everyone is so critical of
Mm-hmm.
everything. So I
Mm-hmm.
want to just say thank you for that and stop and pause because that was extremely beautiful. And again, this transitions well into this next question of I know during that time of 2020 and 2021, that was a hard time for a lot of people. And I
Yep.
know, especially for you and your community,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder for you, did that like ignite your creative spark in a sense of like creating art outside of the mural, just like your own art that kind of was a catalyst for that? How was that like for you as an artist?
I mean, I think that it definitely kind of emboldened me to educate others on these issues and
Hmm.
also just kind of like uplift my community through artistic means
Yeah.
as well. Like I can, of course, talk about our pain, but
Hmm.
I also wanted to share what joy looked like for us as well. What it feels like to be connected culturally and on a universal level. So in other ways, I guess like even when I wasn't making cultural or racial or like social justice oriented specific art,
Hmm.
it definitely kind of opened up my creativity in other ways where like tying back to the part where I said I wanted to celebrate our joys and triumphs,
Yes.
um, it like inspired me to create this other painting,
Hmm.
just solely related to mental health.
Yeah.
Like I painted this sort of semi-abstract piece where I had like some birds coming out of a woman's head.
Hmm.
And I wanted to show like what bliss looks like in
Yeah.
that moment. Like all of this made me more like in touch and aware of my emotions. Like it forced me to really acknowledge them
Yeah.
and not be afraid to say what I have to say in a visual language.
That is extremely powerful. We
Mm-hmm.
hear, like, especially with season 2 now of this podcast, we're hearing a running theme of this story of people of color
Mm-hmm.
overcoming traumatic experiences
Right.
leading to success, where it's not always the case. That's not everyone's story.
Right.
We can share beautiful stories of Asian women, of Black women, of people of color in a way that does not just solely relate or hearken on a traumatic experience or
Right.
overcoming something. So yes, that's like a running trend. Like this has been something that's been said every single episode so far. So I love how you are bringing that to the podcast. But I do want to ask you, as a teacher, and again, your art is so impactful and powerful. How do you encourage your students to explore their own identities through art?
Well, I mean, usually, like, I have like a list of requirements. Like, okay,
Hmm.
this is what I'm looking for. This is in the rubric, or like, you have to do X, Y, and Z to
Hmm.
like get a certain score or whatever. But also at the same time, like, your creativity or how you approach this is free range.
Yeah.
So I say, like, for example, with my digital art class, we just finished a project recently where I had them create name portraits in Photoshop. So, like,
Hmm.
I went through all the steps, like, I went through all the different tools that you could use in the software to really make your typography into art.
Yeah.
But, like, how you choose to approach your name portraits is up to you. So, like, you could use any images that you want that you feel best represents you. So, like, I want to know better, like, what are your interests? What are your hobbies? What are some things that excite you personally and make you who you are? And so we just finished that project, and like the outcome was really stunning.
Yeah, I love that.
Mhm.
I wish that we
Yeah.
had I had digital art as a
Yeah.
option growing up in high school. We just had like regular art and different in various levels. So I love how your school has that.
Yeah, and
Um,
like one of my students, I, didn't know where he was from ethnically,
yeah,
but like, when he showed the flag and he showed like some cultural elements in his name portrait for that, I was like, oh,
yeah,
okay. And then, somebody else, like something just as simple as, oh, now I know that this student likes playing soccer and it's an important
definitely.
part of her life. It's kind of a way for me to even further build relationships more than I already thought I had.
Yes, I love that. As you mentioned before, you use your art for various reasons, especially in the using your platform and your art to bring about social change. And we know art is often a powerful vehicle for activism and social change. How do you
Mhm.
integrate discussions of race, culture, and identity into your classroom?
So I haven't really done so much of that yet
Hmm.
in my classes at the school that I am at right now,
Yeah.
but I will try to further on. But in my student teaching experiences
Hmm.
in the past, I have like tried incorporating it so for example, when I was doing elementary student teaching,
Hmm.
I did like a whole unit on Lunar New Year, right? And it worked because at the same time, they were learning about ancient China and
Yeah.
ancient East Asia in their social studies unit. So, we combined the two and made it artistic. And then so, I talked to the class about how like these traditions have a lot of significance for me
Yeah.
growing up because they're a part of who I am. And we created artwork based off of that, like, Lunar New Year crafts, Lunar New
Hmm.
Year related artwork. So I feel like that was kind of one way where I bridged what they were learning in other subjects with the arts. And then was it last year? No, it was 2 years ago. I did a Saturday workshop
Hmm.
at NYU as part of my student teaching experience to high schoolers for 8 weeks in the spring semester, where like we co-taught with another classmate
Hmm.
about a topic related to social justice or activism in art. So our theme, the theme that I led for my cohort, was on immigration.
Mm-hmm.
And we showed the students like different immigrant artists who use their work to reflect their experiences and also the experiences of their community as a whole. We looked at, again, like I said before, what it means to celebrate Black joy or Latino joy or Asian joy, all that
Yeah.
stuff, right? And I even brought in my experiences with making that mural that I talked about earlier and, show them the different types of art made by Asian American artists
Mm-hmm.
in response to the pandemic. And we
Wow.
had them, yeah, and then like after the lesson we would have the students create their like own art activist social justice posters reflecting on themes of migration, and we gave them that room to explore with the materials and
Mm-hmm.
also bring their own personal stories or like the stories of someone in their families who migrated here into their artwork.
I love that. Thank you for bringing that to you. I know you're still working on that as a component to your
Yeah,
classroom, but you've done some amazing work prior. So I love how it's going to be easy for you to kind of integrate that. So I love
right.
it. So transitioning into segment 3, creative pursuits and storytelling. You're a published children's book author and illustrator. What inspired you to write and illustrate books for young readers?
So it kind of goes back to what I was saying about how I was selectively mute as a kid
Hmm.
and using art as kind of like my channel to communicate. And so, being that I was going through that as a kid and, being like the quiet kid growing up, I've always found like some sort of magic in storytelling and
Hmm.
children's books. I've always really loved looking at the pictures in children's books in general. And, my love for picture books has never waned over the years. Like,
Yeah.
if anything, I feel like it grew tenfold even more.
Yeah.
So, I remember like when I was 6, I made a promise to myself, like, I'm gonna try to illustrate a children's book someday, right?
Hmm.
I want to be the one to do the storytelling, right?
Yeah.
And so I tried to carry through with that
Hmm.
promise, which I did many years later. But yeah, I just really love the magic that can be found in storytelling combined with pictures. And,
Yeah.
I wanted to also use it as a way to kind of teach children about life lessons in a very creative, fun way.
Wow, I love how that love for storytelling and for picture books, it rooted in you as a child and even now as an adult, and you've been able to blend that love together to create something so special.
Yeah.
Um, you also contributed to 70 Healing Journeys,
Mhm.
sponsored by Asian and Loud. Can you share more about the anecdote you wrote and what it meant to be part of this project?
Yeah, so I talked about my experiences growing up, how identity kind of intersects with the art that I made,
Yeah.
and how it carried over into my teaching or my student teaching experiences. So, it was a very vulnerable moment for me
Hmm.
because when Asian and Loud, the person who ran the platform, kind of reached out to us about the opportunity, I was a little
Yeah.
hesitant at first because it meant that I was going to have to share something like really vulnerable with
Yes.
everybody else, people who might not even know me.
Hmm.
But, I realized that this was also an important teaching moment in its own way outside of the classroom.
Yes.
And I wanted to bring that to light. And so, again, like I kind of talked about my childhood experiences and how it inspired me to want to make a difference myself. Like I talked about the unwritten history or unspoken history about like my community in
Yeah.
this country in particular and how I wanted to bring that to light in my art, and I talked about my mural in that book as well. And then
Yes.
like I closed it up with how it impacted my teaching experiences with that workshop and the me trying to integrate different subjects together in our art unit.
I love that. It seems like you're so multifaceted in that area of like storytelling and art. What role do you think storytelling, whether through books, murals, or other visual media, plays
Mhm.
in shaping how students of color see themselves?
I think, for one, the most obvious answer is it
Hmm.
definitely gives an upper hand in representation.
Definitely.
I think when people, especially young people, see themselves represented in media or in literature in a positive light,
Hmm.
um, I think, like, first of all, it gives them a better self-esteem. Like, you know, they won't feel alone. Like they'll feel seen and they'll feel heard. And
Yes.
if they have these things, right, these mental emotional supports, then like, they're going to grow up being
Hmm.
able to being able to like gain that self-confidence
Yes.
and also want to inspire others to do the same. And it also kind of sends the message that our stories matter, like our
Mm.
stories have a place in this world, and we're not just like a statistic or a monolith or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Like, we're real people and our stories matter too.
You're completely right. I mean, I just think about like as a child, more than anything, being able to see someone represented in my classrooms. I mean, kids are with us, 5 days a week for
Mm,
long various hours.
right,
Um, and it just takes a minute to be represented and to see yourself as a child and be like, man, that's what I could do. I could
right.
be someone like that.
Hmm.
And that's why, again, you're saying it's so important for our stories to be told because they do
Hmm.
have a place
Right.
here. So, and, with that being said, we transition into segment 4, which is representation and supporting students of color. What challenges have you faced as an Asian American educator in the public school system, and how do you navigate them?
So far, I'd say like I'm really lucky to
Hmm.
work in a school where the majority of the teachers here are also like teachers of color.
Yeah.
So, it's a very diverse community.
Hmm.
But I'd say like from my experiences growing up, right,
Hmm.
with like majority white teachers or like less teachers of color, much or and even like much less like, who are Asian American like me.
Yeah.
Um, I think as a kid, some of those challenges were them kind of understanding our cultural experiences. So, let's say like maybe something that you do or say might be misconstrued as impolite in American culture or vice versa.
Yeah.
And so, if the teacher or the adult in the building in particular wasn't from that background as you
Hmm.
are, like it's going to take them a while to really understand that.
Hmm.
And sometimes at first it would like lead to miscommunications along the way. So I remember I had this one experience when I was younger, so like now when I look back on it I laugh,
Yeah.
but at the time I think the adults in the building kind of made it a more serious deal than it
Hmm.
was in my head because they didn't understand the cultural implications behind it.
Yeah.
So is it okay if I like share a little bit
Oh,
about
yeah.
it?
Definitely.
Yeah, so like this was when I was in third grade, and in Asian culture we have this technique called cupping.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's just like it's a way to get toxins out of your body, whatever. But like of course I don't blame them for it. The adults or the staff in the building didn't really understand that because they didn't come from the same background as I did. And so I remember like going to school the next day with cupping marks
Hmm.
on my arm, right? So, for me, that was normal. That was like for medicinal purposes. But to them, understandably so, they were
Hmm.
shocked. And I think they were almost about to call child protection
Oh my
services
gosh.
because they thought that I was being mistreated at home or
Yeah.
something. And then they had the counselor, they had the social worker come in, and, they phoned home, they spoke to my mom about it, and we
Hmm.
had to like explain to them. And that's when it cleared up. But it's just, I think in that moment, maybe if like I had a teacher who was from the same background
Hmm.
or like understand what cupping was, it probably wouldn't have escalated into what it did.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That is so. I bet that as a child, it's like, whoa, like it's
Yeah.
something so familiar to you.
Right. Like,
And
why
like,
are you all making a big deal? And
yeah.
then, like, after I became a teacher
Uh
myself and
huh.
going through all these different trainings, I'm like, oh, okay, like,
Yeah. It
they were
makes.
just concerned, but, at the same time, I feel like it could have been avoided if they understood the
Yes.
context behind it.
You are completely right. Yeah, just some understanding and how, again, that's why representation matters so much. Just imagine if they had a teacher on their campus who was an Asian American teacher
Uh-huh.
that could have also contributed, and, it wouldn't have been so jarring as a
Right. It's
child.
like, oh my God, like, are you being abused? Are you
Yeah.
okay?
Oh my gosh, that is crazy. But I want to ask, in your experience, you talk about growing up and, not having representation and kind of navigating those waters. How
Yeah.
can schools do a better job of supporting and uplifting teachers of color, especially in creative fields like yours?
Yeah, I think maybe just like allowing us to kind of be able to incorporate more discussions
Hmm.
revolving around identity and culture and all these important themes
Yeah.
into our classroom in our artwork. I think definitely giving us resources on like other different educators of color who has made a
Hmm.
difference historically, or letting us bring in examples of like how people of color throughout history has been successful and use that in our classroom. And also, I think just like understanding our concerns and not dismissing them.
Yes.
If we say, hey, like we're facing discrimination, or like, this coworker was genuinely insensitive with their remarks about something
Yeah.
that is so personal to us, just like not dismissing our remarks or sweeping our concerns under the rug if we bring them up to HR or whoever's in charge.
You're completely right. I mean, I think like when you say, sweeping under the rug, we hear so many times where, we have people of color, teachers of color advocating and voicing concerns.
Right.
But I guess sometimes it seems like, oh my gosh, they're complaining again. And
Right.
it's more to that story of like it's not complaining, we see how history, continues to repeat itself. So I love how you bring that into the topic here.
Right. And yeah, and like, there are times where like well-meaning people will be like,
Hmm.
"Oh, the other person didn't mean it like that." And,
Yes.
X, Y, and Z. And it's like, okay, maybe not everybody has malicious intent. I understand that.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I have every right to voice my concerns and talk about it.
You're right.
Mm.
That, that is something that, I mean, that could be a whole episode in itself. So, I mean, but thank you for bringing that here. Do want to ask you, what advice would you give to young artists of color who might not feel seen or represented in the art world?
I think just definitely put yourself out as much as possible. And I think this
Hmm.
just goes towards artists in general to
Yeah.
begin with, but especially more so for us. If
Hmm.
we want to have a voice in the arts and the creative field, and just like not be afraid to share your story, because somebody out there who's watching might appreciate it
You are
and
right.
thank you for it. And also, just like just not being afraid,
Hmm.
and keeping in mind that the road may be long and
Yeah.
that you might have to overcome more hurdles or obstacles to get there,
Yes.
but to just like keep doing it
Hmm.
anyway, because like you never know if you don't try. Like, you know I'd rather fail several times than just not try at all. Like, I want them to know that their voice is important, and
Hmm.
even if like mainstream might not see it as such, just like keep putting what you have to say, keep putting your story out there, because like one day or another eventually somebody's going to take notice, and you're going to like have a breakthrough if that's possible for you,
Yeah.
or like eventually there is somebody out there who's going to be part of your niche.
Yeah, you're completely right. Fear is a catalyst for so much. And sometimes fear can, overcome your desire or will to continue on. And so I like how you're blending those two of like, yes, you can be fearful, but
Mhm.
also keep going.
Mhm.
That also brings me to like an idea of like being comfortable. And so, once you start feeling uncomfortable, you feel like change and things are happening, things are feeling weird. That's a
Mhm.
great catalyst again for advocacy and change and
Yeah.
impactful work. So
Right.
that is something that you're doing so well. So yes, thank you.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that
Yeah.
where like, it's important if you can find other artists of color in your
Yes.
niche because you could learn a lot from them and that way you have like a support system so you're not in this alone.
You're right. It's all about community, really, it is. But here we are at our closing segment. Final thoughts and where to follow Stephanie. Stephanie, this has been such an inspiring conversation. Before we wrap up, where can listeners follow you and support your work?
So they can follow me and see some of the things that I do on my art/professional account
Mm,
at Stephanie Wan Art on Instagram. So I mostly post about my own artwork. I
yeah.
post my students' artwork on there. Like, I post about my teaching experiences on that platform. So, if people want to follow me, they can follow me on Stephanie Wan Art on Instagram.
Yes, awesome.
Mhm.
And we will put that in the episode description. Please, Stephanie has some amazing work, so much to offer. So please give her a follow, just view her work, her journey. So thank you for sharing that. And then here on the podcast, we love to give our flowers and congratulate you on anything big or small that you have coming up. Is there
Thank
anything in
you.
the future for you coming up that we can give you a little hoot hoot for, big round of applause?
Definitely the book that's coming out, 70 Healing Journeys.
Yes.
So, since last time we've spoken over
Mhm.
DMs, it's already been launched on Amazon, and
Awesome.
I will
Okay.
be giving Brandon the links later to where readers can find them.
Definitely, yes. So that'll be in the episode description as well. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing that. And congratulations. I know that's a huge undertaking for you and also something that you should be extremely proud of. So thank you. Thank you. I want to say thank you again, Stephanie, for sharing your journey and your insights with us. This has been extremely impactful, even changing my own perspective on art and
Mm.
community and all of the things that you have mentioned today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, of course. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Also, follow Teaching in Color podcast on all social media. And until next time, keep teaching in color.